Thank you, Dave. Good morning, men. Great to see your naked faces. I can't wait for Sunday, Saturday night and Sunday, the liberation of the church, and people singing without masks and not feeling hypocritical about it. And that's great. I feel a lot more free now. You know, I'm not faking it anymore. So I was delighted to hear the announcement last night by the governor, and surprised by the timing. So just thankful, you know, and be very good, maybe a step toward normalcy. Well, if you do want to invite your son or your daughter to watch an Ironworks video with you, this might be a good one. Or maybe your grandchildren should watch it with you, because we're launching into something that we all need as parents, and our parents need this. And so we're walking into the fifth commandment today, and let me just kind of ramp up a little bit. Remember, we're building step by step a biblical worldview, which is a lifelong process. We will always be asking the question, well, how does this policy of the government fit into my biblical worldview? How do I respond to that? How does this thing going on in my family get answered by a holistic biblical worldview? What about my business? What about my health? How does God's worldview, His revelation to us through the Scripture and through common revelation, how does that answer some things? How does that guide me through? And a biblical worldview is kind of a grid through which we see things. And so we've been talking about that by looking at God's moral law, the way He's wired the world through the Ten Commandments. These have never been rescinded. They are true. When we break them, we break ourselves. We hurt ourselves. And God gave them to us to guide us through this world. So we're walking through them slowly, and now we're walking into commandment number 5, which we're going to get to in a moment. But let's just ramp up here and remember, what's the purpose of the law? If it had not been for the law, I would have not known perfection. Is that what it says? I would not have known sin. Remember that the law is like the rumble strip on the highway. You know, when you're kind of wandering, you're sleepy at night, and you're wandering toward the edge of the road, and your tires hit that rumble strip, and it wakes you up. The law is that thing that says you're going out of bounds. You're running off the road. The law is not primarily positive, except that it reminds me of our own sinful and selfish hearts. And so the law corrects us. It's constantly doing that. In fact, in the same passage in Romans chapter 7, Paul says, the very commandment that promised life proved to be death for me. So what's the purpose of the law? The reason the Ten Commandments have such a bad name is because they've been made into legalism, and they haven't been used for the purpose for which they were made, which is to remind us that you can't become righteous by keeping the law. The law reminds you that you need to run to grace. It reminds you, I need to run to God for freedom, for forgiveness. I need to submit in humility to Him. And the law in the Old Testament reminded the people, I need to take a sacrifice to the temple and humble myself before God and ask for His forgiveness, that this sacrifice, which represents an atonement, ultimately the atonement of Christ, that in that sacrifice, His grace will cleanse me and renew me. So the law reminds me, run to grace, run to grace, run to grace, because none of us completely fulfills the law. So the law is like taking an x-ray of your soul. And we've walked through 4 commandments. So commandment number 1, my doctrinal statement has the right God named in it. But the law looks at my heart and helps me see that I can easily serve other desires that are my own. Commandment number 2 says I shouldn't have any idols, and I don't have a temple, but I might have an idol in the crib, or in my garage, or in my profit and loss statement, or in my business. Commandment number 3 says, you know, I can obey that by not cussing and not swearing, but it challenges me, am I representing the name of God in a way that honors Him? And that's a constant examination. I keep seeing that everywhere in this. And commandment number 4, you know, it's easy to say, well, I think the Sabbath is a good idea, but frankly, I'm just too busy. And I've got to take care of myself. And I'm not sure everything will be provided for if I don't work 24/7. So the law keeps reminding us, I'm hitting the rumble strip here. It's reminding me to examine my life and run to grace and freedom. And for some of us in this room, there's going to be no commandment that's more piercing than commandment number 5. For some of you, this is going to be a joy. It's going to be easy. You've been doing this. It's been made easy for you. It was easy for you to write a Mother's Day card and send it. For some of you, it will be easy for you to write a Father's Day tribute and go to the Father's Day barbecue. But for others of you, this is an extremely painful commandment because of the damage that's been done in your life. Because somebody's missing who should have been there. Because of instruction that you desperately desired and you're still suffering because somebody didn't guide you through your younger life. So you know the commandment that we're coming to here. Commandment number 5, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land and that the Lord your God is giving you. This is one of 2 positive commandments. It pushes us in a positive direction. The New Testament version of that, Paul quotes it to the Ephesians, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. So let's just walk through this commandment. And Dave's right. We'll be doing this for the next 3 weeks, talking about how do we do this in our context. And so let's just talk about what it means, first of all. First of all, honor means weight or value or respect or importance. It doesn't mean obey your parents for life. It doesn't mean you have to like your parents. It'd be good if you did. It doesn't even mean that you have an emotional love for your parents. But it means you need to honor parents. Now, honor and weight and value is taught throughout the Scripture. Let me just give you a list of things that we are to honor. We're to honor God. We're to honor Jesus Christ. We are to honor the aged. So I honor some of you in this room. We're to honor church leaders, elders and pastors. We're to honor government leaders and masters. That's been hard. We're to honor marriage. And we're to honor father and mother. Now, let's think about this. What does honor mean? I can honor the Lakeville police. I don't have to love the woman who stops me or the man, but I can honor the office, I can honor the position, I can honor what they represent, I can honor what stands behind them. And this is what it means. Honor your father and your mother. And what it ultimately means is to, at its basic minimum, is to provide care for father and mother. There's an interesting passage in Mark chapter 7 where Jesus confronts the Pharisees, and listen to what he says. And he said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to establish your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and whoever reviles his father or mother must surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father and his mother, whatever you would have gained from me is korban, which means set aside for God, given to God, then you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or mother, thus making void the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down, and many such things like that. In other words, they were saying, listen, you are supposed to care for your aging parents. Think about Israel in the Old Testament days. People, they were given land. Generations would be farming the same land. They'd often live in the same house or right next door to each other. They were passing on everything they had, the land, the animals, the traditions, the trade. And so often as the parents got older and were no longer able to work, the next generation was to care for them. They were to honor them by caring for them. But the Pharisees were saying, listen, hey, Dad, what you were going to get, I've devoted that to God. So you're basically on your own. And Jesus is saying, you set aside the commandment for your own selfish traditions. Now, what I'm getting at here is that basically honor means caring for. And in Deuteronomy 30, verse 19, it says, choose life. Choose life. To dishonor our parents is really to despise the source of our own life. If we despise our parents, it's basically saying, hey, I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask for you to be my parents. And we basically telegraph a kind of a self-loathing when we think that way about our parents. And if we dishonor our parents, we're less likely to honor God. I like what Chuck Swindoll says about this. He says, and Dave kind of said it in his introductory remarks. Chuck Swindoll said, whatever else may be said about the home, it's the bottom line of life. The anvil upon which attitudes and convictions are hammered out. It is the place where life's bills come due, the single most influential force in our earthly existence. It is at home, among family members, that we come to terms with circumstances. It is here that life makes up its mind. Now, I might be picking some scabs right now. Not intentionally, but just because that didn't happen with you. I may be stirring up some really old, dark memories that you really don't want to think about. And I realize in a room with the demographic I'm looking at, many of the parents in this room are no longer living. And so you look back and say, how do I honor my father and my mother? Well, let's go on and just unpack the verse, first of all. It says, honor your father and your mother, not some imaginary parent. Not some leave it to Beaver, June and Ward Cleaver, but your parents, your own father and your own mother, and they are flawed. They're incomplete people. They're unfinished human beings. But God is saying this to us because honoring father and mother is the bridge to the next 5 commandments, which now become more horizontal. Don't murder, don't steal, don't covet. It's the bridge to living in society. And we don't have to go very far to say, why is our society so corrupt, so off the rails, so unhinged? It's because we're losing it in the very first place that honor should be given. Where do you learn to honor authority? You learn it in the home. Where do you learn values? You learn it in the home. And when that breaks down, the rest of society begins to break down, because the home is essential for a functioning society. And it's the building block of all civilization. So you're to love your father and your mother. So I've got a little chart here, and you might need to find somebody younger to read the letters on it. It's microtype, but take a moment and put down the name of your father and your mother, and then who was, do a brief chart, just a brief family of origin chart. The top line says grandmother, I think, Ed. Who is your mother's mother and your mother's father? And it's pretty simple to figure that out. So just write that in if you know what that is. Now, there may be some step parents involved here. But take a moment to fill that out. When I do this, it's remarkable how little I know about my grandparents. I only met them once or twice. I don't know what it's like to have a Minnesota 3-generational family where I go by grandma's house every day after school or something like that. I lived in Colorado, and one set of grandparents lived in Oregon. And my grandfather on my mother's side passed away in Brooklyn, New York when I was 5, so I never met him. So it's remarkable how little I know, and I probably should have done a lot more research on this. But okay, you've got the names down there. Now, we don't have time to go into this right now, but you might do some of it around your tables. When you think about your parents and their parents, are there any recurring trickle-down problems or strongholds that you see in your family of origin? Are there some strengths that you see? So what do you see? What I'm getting at is here, what do you see that your father and your mother inherited from their parents? This goes a long way to helping us understand and honor our own parents. And we often wonder, what did my dad get from his dad? What kind of trauma did my mother experience in her household of origin? And of course, you can go back generation after generation and you wonder, what kind of things are passed down in the strongholds and the weaknesses? You know, is there a history of alcoholism? Is there a history of anger? Is there an interruption with abandonment? Is there a divorce or a death or a loss that brought trauma into the family that was maybe never talked about? Just passed down the line. See, we don't come from nowhere, do we? We know that biologically. And my father and my mother, your father and your mother, didn't come from nowhere. They're a link in the chain of fallen humanity. And the commandment says, nevertheless, we're to honor father and mother. And you know what? They wonder, did I do anything right? You're probably wondering that from your own children. Do you think I've done anything right? And those little dribs and drabs you receive from your own children are precious to you. The times when they reflect, hey, thanks, Dad. You did that. Or, I remember when you did that. We treasure those things. We have to wonder, I mean, our parents are wondering that too. Did we do anything right? Did I provide? Did you see the sacrifice? Did you understand how I went to work? I hated my job for 25 years, but I went to work and I provided. How are we going to remember that? So it says this, honor your father and mother that you may live long in the land. Honoring the heritage that you have, honoring the land, honoring the skills. Remember, in ancient Israel, this was a generational thing. And think of how powerful it is to have 2 or 3 generations standing together and walking together toward the future. Passing on the skills, passing on the land, passing on the prosperity. And when you're on a team, when you're in a family that is cooperative, that is honoring one another, there is a combined strength of the whole that's greater than just the parts. And I think that's what God has in mind here, is that you'll live long in the land because first of all, the land will be cared for. You will know your neighbors. Your name will be known. And the land, the family, which is the basis for a national kind of strength, will become known as Israel, God's people. Now remember, Moses, when he's given the law, God is training a slave population. They've been cast off people. I mean, we think about the horrors of our American heritage of slavery, where slaves were sold off, and you've all seen movies of these horrifying scenes where a child is sold off to another plantation and ripped out of the family. Well, that's the history of slavery throughout the world. So the Israelites were slaves. They could be assigned, killed, punished. Anything could be done with them. They did not know what it was like to have the security of a family. So when Moses is giving this law, when God is giving the law through Moses, These are people whose lives were accustomed to being disrupted. They didn't have a future. They were disconnected and easily dispersed. And so now God is saying, no, you have a father and a mother, and I want you, this living generation, to honor that father and mother, and I want this to perpetuate down through the generations. And then think about Paul, who in Ephesians 6 is saying, children, obey your parents. Paul is speaking to an immoral city, to a Roman culture, where children were often cast off, where there's a lot of brutality, a lot of cast-off culture and cruelty. And he's saying, I want you to redeem this life by children obeying your parents. So I want you to take another moment and look at this chart. How is my honor of my mother and father? And this is not for you to score with somebody else. This is just private. Maybe it's never happened. Maybe it's the hardest thing for you to imagine, for me to honor my father and mother because of what they did or didn't do to me. On the other end of the spectrum, maybe it's constant. It's probably for most of it somewhere in the middle, that there's something we could do much better. So I'm going to be challenging you this week and next week and the following week. How are you honoring father and mother? So let me give you a couple of ways. First of all, seize the opportunity. If you've never told them, start now. You're a week late on Mother's Day. She'll forgive you. But you're a couple of weeks ahead on Father's Day. You know what they've discovered in prisons? When they took free Mother's Day cards to prisons, they all went. When they took free Father's Day cards to prisons, hardly any men picked them up, because they didn't have much good to say to their fathers. I'm not sure where that lands here, but seize the opportunity. If you've never told them, start now. You can start by remembering birthdays. You can start by simple ways: Mother's Day, Father's Day, Veterans Day. Thank yous for things they've done. Random things that you remember that you could jot them a note or give them a phone call. Seize the opportunity. Now, for some, I have a friend who honors, my friend's wife honors her mother by staying away. Her mother has some emotional problems, and whenever she's with her mother turns abusive. I mean, horribly, verbally, destructively abusive. And this is a woman who's in her 50s. Her mother's now in her 80s. And one of the ways that she honors her mother is by lessening the tension between them. It's the only thing she's found to do. There are ways to honor that maybe are not the happy Hallmark card ways to honor. And so she stays away, but she tells her why. They've had to navigate that. You can seize the opportunity. You can move toward them. You know, I was sharing this with a young man last night, a couple that were mentoring before their marriage. Actually, I shared it with his fiancée. I said, here's the magical words for men. 3 magical things every man wants to hear. I love you, I'm proud of you, and good job. Those are magical words for men. And her fiancé was going, yeah, he got it right. I want to hear that from you. We want to hear that from our fathers, but we may not have heard that from our fathers. But you know Christ. Maybe your dad never did. Or maybe he never had a model. So you can move toward your parents in perhaps ways that they never moved toward you. Why? Because you have a whole new life. You have a whole new source of that life in your life. And you have a different model. And now they have you. So in many ways, I've heard this from many men, they've begun to parent their parents in modeling this, in affirmations, in thanks, in gratitude, in finding some way to say, I remembered this about you. Even though there's lots of stuff that I'd like to blank out, I did remember this about you because they know their dad or their mom is hungry to hear, did we do anything right? Well, what if your parents are no longer living? Except they're living in the failures and the bad memories and the toxic weaknesses that they put into your life. So it's smoldering inside of you. So for many of us, our parents are gone. But we need to make peace with their memory. So I want to encourage you to do this. Acknowledge their imperfections, their sins against you. Acknowledge those to God. You might need to take a long walk, speak them out. You might need to write them out in a journal. Acknowledge what they did. Don't deny it. Lament what you missed. Lament the hurts that you still carry. And then ask God to help you forgive this flawed human being. Because if you don't come to grips with honoring your parents, you will model that to your own children and grandchildren. Something will telegraph. Something will come through. Something will say, I'm wounded and I'm still blaming someone else. And yes, it hurts. We're not denying that. I would encourage you to get the book called The Freedom Factor by Bruce Wilkinson, which gives you a very good and rigorous and biblical way to forgive. We're going to talk about some more of this next week and the following. But I think for all of us, we could look at our little chart here on how I honor my father and my mother, and we could probably tick it up at least one number. And I'm going to invite you to actually write some things. If you have living parents, I'm going to invite you to write a tribute to them. It doesn't have to be a Shakespearean play. It could be one page. And I absolutely assure you, if you do this, they will frame it. They will keep it. They will read it over and over and over again. It will be a gift to them from you, and it will be a gift to you. So how will honor come to me from my children? Let's just do this briefly. Dennis Rainey says the most pivotal issue before our nation is the spiritual and moral condition of individual families. If a spiritual reformation does not occur at the grassroots level in individual homes, then the battle for our families and our culture is doomed to failure. We need a family reformation. And we're pretty much like a pagan Roman culture right now. But the New Testament came into that culture. And within a generation, transformed the generation. So here's the ways you will be honored by your children. If they remember that you or I submit to God's lordship over my life. That I nurture them in discipline and love. If I don't provoke them to anger, the prodding, the poking, the instigation of anger in children that holds them accountable to an adult standard that they've never been taught or coached in. That's provocation. I prepare them for their life ahead, that they're like arrows that I send out. And I've launched them. I've told them throughout their life, you need to go into a future that I'm not going to see, and I want to prepare you to go. If I love them regardless of their performance, and that's a hard one. It's a hard one to model, but it's someone that we can do. I will always love you. I'm disappointed in some things, but I will always love you. If I introduce them to my master, who is Jesus Christ, that's the ultimate gift of love for your children, is to introduce them to Jesus yourself, and so that they know Him and have Him as their guide. Well, this is a deep subject, and I don't know where you stand with this. I don't know if you have living parents. I don't know what your memory is about your parents. But this commandment is not rescinded to us either. So I have some questions for you to talk about. You've got a little chart there that might help you conjure up some things by the questions that we're asking. And I want you to talk amongst yourselves and learn from one another how to honor father and mother. So let's do that together around your tables.